Welcome. I'm Jeff Deloach, president of the Times Free Press. I want to welcome you here tonight. How appropriate it is as we have the candidates. We're going to hear from the candidates for the governor of Tennessee on the University of Tennessee Chattanooga campus in the Tennessee room. Very appropriate. And I want to thank you guys for being here. You're putting a bunch of miles crisscrossing across the state. Thank you for making Chattanooga a priority and being here with us tonight. And I want to introduce Allison Gerber, editor at the Times Free Press. She's going to introduce our candidates.
Thank you again for coming to Chattanooga tonight. We drew names, or numbers rather, before this started, and Randy Boyd, Republican Randy Boyd, I'd like to welcome you. He's going to go first. He is the former Commissioner of Economic and Community Development for the state of Tennessee. Democrat Carl Dean is the former mayor of Nashville. Businessman Bill Lee, a Republican. Then we have Craig Fitzhugh, state representative and a Democrat, and Republican Beth Harwell, Speaker of the Tennessee House. Moderating tonight are my colleagues Dave Flessner, who is the business editor for the Times Free Press, and Judy Walton, who is a government reporter. Dave's going to go over some housekeeping for the evening.
Let me add my word of welcome and thanks to each of you for being here tonight, both here in person at UTC campus and those of you watching online, and especially for our candidates for taking time out to be with us tonight. We greatly appreciate answering the questions that readers have suggested that they would like to be asked in this gubernatorial race. Diane Black, I should mention, Representative Diane Black, was invited to be here tonight. Her campaign said she was in another part of the state and could not be with us here tonight. I'd ask as an audience that if you have a cell phone, that you put that on silence mode if you haven't already, and that you refrain from any kind of outburst or applause during the campaign, during the forum tonight until that's over, and then we'll loudly allow you to thank all of the candidates at the end of the forum so that we can have maximum time for questions. Our format tonight is very simple. There'll be no opening statements, but each candidate will be provided 1 minute at the end of our question and answer period to offer a closing statement. Judy Walton, our government affairs reporter, and I will be asking questions to each of the candidates, and most of them will go to all the candidates, some to individual candidates as suggested by our readers over the last couple of weeks since we announced this debate. Prior to tonight's debate, as we mentioned, the candidates randomly drew numbers to determine the question order, which will reverse in the closing statements. And by that draw, the first question will go to Randy Boyd from Judy Walton.
Yes, hello and welcome. This is a question on government efficiency. The Tennessee economy right now and the U.S. economy are humming along in high gear, but the business cycle being what it is, there will inevitably be a retraction. As governor, what would you do to be efficient and effective? What kinds of programs specifically would you cut? Would you reach into reserve funds or raise taxes, or how would you meet your constitutional obligation to balance the budget?
Great. First off, I just want to say thank you to the Chattanooga Free Times for welcoming us, and also great to be back in Chattanooga. I think this is my 34th time in Chattanooga in the last 17 months, so it's always great to be here. Enjoy it. So as a business person, we've had some difficult times. 2008, my company, 1995, some really challenging times. So I've got the experience to lead a company and an organization through difficult times. With regards to the state of Tennessee, I have had 2 opportunities to serve with Governor Haslam, and I've got to see firsthand a couple of ways in which we could prevent that situation. So the first off, the governor has a really good practice of having all of his commissioners, all 23 of them, each year bring in a budget cut. So it was very surprising when I first got there as Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, but every year you come in with a reduction of 3 to 5%, and then he and the Commissioner of F&A decide how much they're going to take. The good news is, so every year we would reduce the operating costs, and it's a practice that I want to continue. So we're continuing to trying to find ways to be more efficient across the board. But the second thing is, and this is one of the objectives I have as governor, is to complete the drive to 55. That means by the year 2025, 55% of our population has something beyond high school. Not everybody goes to a 4-year college, but everybody needs, 55% needs to have something beyond high school to meet the jobs of the future. Now today, we're at 39%. If we get to 55%, the state of Tennessee, the Tennesseans will make $9 billion more a year, and we'll make $700 million more a year in revenue to the state. So reduce costs, achieve our educational objectives, which will increase revenue.
Mr. Dean?
Well, actually, I had the, I don't know what the right word, it's certainly not a pleasure. I had to manage my way through the deepest recession since the Great Depression when I was mayor in my first term. And I think you have to make some difficult decisions. I made a decision very early on that clearly we didn't want to balance the books of the government by unbalancing the books of families and businesses. And so we had to make cuts. And we made cuts in almost every department, some as much as 15%, and that was difficult to do. But at the same time, I had run on a campaign where I was very supportive of public education, public safety, and economic development. Those were the things that I thought would move the city forward, and I didn't want to back away from those. So those were areas that we protected. We weren't able to do everything that we wanted to do by any means, but we were able to preserve their funding, and actually get the police department up to full staffing, and then be very vigorous about economic development. I think one of the things we have to do as a state is be very conscious of the fact that we are very much sales tax dependent, and there will be another recession. The business cycle hasn't been repealed, and we need to prepare for it. We need to put money away in the rainy day reserve so that we'll be able to withstand it for more than we're able to right now. I think we're at about 26 days right now. But putting money aside when times are good is a good practice.
Mr. Lee?
Yes, just by way of introduction, I'm Bill Lee. I am a third-generation cattle farmer. I'm a businessman who employs 1,200 mostly skilled tradespeople, and I'm a man who, in part because of a tragedy in my life that God used in a real powerful way to change my perspective, a man who knows that the highest call for my life is to serve others. That's why I'm running. And I think as governor, one of the most important jobs that I would have is to manage the budget. I run a company that's got about a $250 million revenue budget. And we certainly have been in times of prosperity, and we've been in times of difficulty. And in business, if you don't manage a budget, you go bankrupt. And in government, if you don't manage a budget, you raise taxes, and that's not a good idea. And so what we do have to do is look at how it is that we can run the most efficient government. I'm also a conservative who believes that expanding government beyond an appropriate growth associated with population growth and inflation is a really bad idea. So we have to look at every aspect of our government and our government budget in order to manage that. And we don't do that specifically with one plan. We look at multiple ways. I went through a really difficult time in our business at one point where we had to cut a budget from $100 million to $67 million, in part because I had left my business for a couple years after my wife passed away. When I came back, we were in deep trouble. Had to make really deep decisions and make significant cuts in that budget.
Sorry, Mr. Lee, you're out of time.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that. I wasn't watching the
apologize.
time.
We'll figure out a system.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Fitzhugh, it's your turn.
Thank you. This governor, the current governor, was the only governor in the past three I know that wasn't faced with a recession. So the odds are the next governor will be faced with a recession, and I've thought about that. Balancing the budget is a requirement that we have to do, and it's not hard to balance X's and pluses and minuses. The key is what you put inside that budget to balance, and it means our budget is one that what you cherish, what you think is most important, is what you'll fund. So I'll always remember that, and I think that education is the first thing, health is the second thing, and then economic and jobs are the third thing. So those would be the priorities. However, we are the lowest tax state from a perspective, the state and local perspective in the country. And when we do these cuts, these across-the-board cuts every year that the current governor's asked for, who gets hurt? Mostly mental health, mostly developmental disability folks, mostly those that don't have the ability to really speak for themselves. So we have to be really careful on that. We have limited means of raising revenue. Normally, our revenues will be raised every 7 or 8 years, and I got to talk faster, but we haven't raised any revenues since 2002, which is 16 years. I would look at things like the internet decision we just had to bring revenue into our state. I would look at other things like possibilities of the, and I'll come back to that later. Thank you. Sorry.
Speaker Harwell.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, I'm unique in the situation that I am Speaker of the House, and I'm the person that has had to sign 8 budgets that are balanced for our state of Tennessee, and I'm proud of that. I served on the Finance Committee for many years. I understand when times are tough how difficult it can be to manage that budget. We talk very carefully, you know, about, oh, we balance our budget. Well, I'll tell you, I've been there when we have taken non-reoccurring money and spent it on reoccurring expenses. I have been there when we have gone into deficit spending. I've been there when we have raided our rainy day fund. We have stopped doing that. I am proud of the fact that we are a balanced budget state. We have not raised taxes. I've been there during the difficult times. I've been there through the good times. And I will tell you, nothing more, it means more to me as the next governor of this state than balancing our budget every single year, not using any funny numbers, but actually doing it in a responsible manner. And that is what I'm committed to doing. You know, it's often said if you want to know what someone truly values, you look at their budget. And when you look at the budget of Tennessee, the 2 items that we have increased money for every single year has been education and health care, because we care about those 2 issues. And so my goal when I was Speaker of the House was to limit the number of bills that are introduced, because bills turn into laws and laws turn into spending. And so when we limit the size of government, we are able to do what we are chosen to do efficiently and well and live within our means.
Each of you has voiced support for broadening online taxes on online sales from e-commerce, which the Supreme Court ruled last week states will now be able to do for most major internet sales, and could help the state capture as much as $450 million of additional money. In 2016, the state enacted a Revenue Department rule that sought to require out-of-state sellers with no physical presence to collect a tax on any retailer with sales more than $500,000. Small businesses have raised the concern that this could be burdensome to know about taxing rates across the country in different rates. I wonder, as you move toward potentially broadening online sales taxes, would you move ahead with that, and what, if any, exemption would you give for small businesses, and the extent that you get more money, where would you spend that money? And I'll start with Mr. Dean.
Well, I certainly would look to move forward with taxing internet sales, because I believe, number one, we need the revenue. Number two, it's an issue of fairness. I mean, folks who operate businesses here are competing against people out of state who are selling to Tennessee and not paying taxes on it. And so it kind of levels the ground, which I think is the right thing to do. The exact details, obviously, you need to work with the legislature and go through a very thoughtful process. What would I do with it? You know, my emphasis is going to be public education. I think that we need to be putting more money in public education. And one of the things that we need to do in this state is pay our teachers more. You know, I've traveled the state, and whether you're in Shelby County and you hear about STEM programs where they're afraid of losing teachers because of the private sector, whether you're in a rural county where you hear about the lack of a sales tax base there at all, or the ability to garner more revenue from property taxes, and they lose teachers to districts within Tennessee. And then you know that Kentucky and Georgia pay their teachers more, and we lose teachers there. So that would be a primary goal of mine. I think that by investing in education, we're going to move our state forward more than any other way. We're going to see an increase in jobs. We're going to see better jobs. And as a result of that, we'll see revenue grow.
Mr. Lee, would you favor an online sales tax? Would there be any exemption, and how would you spend the money?
I think that it's important, as governor of Tennessee, that it's important that we look at protecting the businesses in this state, making certain that the tax structure is fair all across the board. And when we have businesses in Tennessee that their bricks and mortar are here, and they're doing business here, and they're selling products to the citizens of this state, and they're having to compete with a company from out of state that's doing online sales that isn't having to compete on the same level, it's not fair to our businesses. So we need to be certain that we do that, and that we have a fair taxation schedule for all businesses. To the broader question of business taxes in this state. You know, we are a low-tax state, but we're not really a low business tax state. Our franchise and excise taxes in Tennessee are not competitive with the adjacent states around us. In fact, we have companies in parts of our state, Memphis, for example, who are enticed and sometimes will move across the border into Mississippi because their franchise and excise tax, their business taxes, and their environment there is better from a tax standpoint. We have to change that. We have to correct that so that we can have businesses flourish in this state. I do believe that investing a business created in Tennessee is significantly better than one brought here, and so we need to invest in our small businesses.
Representative Fitzhugh, would you favor an online tax? Won't consumers have to pay more with that?
I favor it, and here's why. I've been for what we used to call the streamlined sales tax for many years, and I'm certainly glad to see this court decision, which, remember now, folks, just remember these aren't new taxes. These are taxes that people are supposed to pay, but don't because there hadn't been means to collect them. So it will help all of us as taxpayers when we have that fairness. Concerning the small businesses in Tennessee, it will actually help them too, because it will level that playing field by requiring those folks that buy online to pay that tax, and it may allow those folks to walk down the street and buy it from a mom and pop, or new moms and pops come together. I think that we're going to have more than $400 million, frankly, from what we look at. It may take it a while to grow, but I think it's something that we can use to pay our teachers better, and based on what we feel like in the budget is the most important thing we do. We have an opportunity here that will guard against a recession, as I was speaking about before, and I think I really think this is for us having a limited taxing ability now, and a sales tax that's the highest in the country. I think this is good news.
Speaker Auer?
Well, I think it is also, I will agree, it's good news, because I think it's an opportunity for us to do something that I've wanted to do for some time now, which is lower our sales tax. So the obvious answer is it's a question of fairness. I have to tell you that I have 3 20-year-olds in my household, and those 20-year-olds, my children, they never go to a mall. They buy everything online, even their school clothes. So the time for us is now to understand that we need to collect our taxes on online sales. That is what is fair to our mom and pop stores all across our wonderful state. They are citizens that have been paying their property tax, are good community leaders and participants, and we don't need to treat them unfairly. I actually myself went and looked at a washing machine the other weekend. I needed to replace it, and the man said to me at A1 Appliances in Nashville, "Are you going to come look here and then go buy it online after I tell you what's the best product to buy?" And I thought, he has a very good point. So we do need to capture that money. We need that money, but I would do it in a sense that it would be revenue neutral for you as taxpayers. I would look to South Dakota, who's leading the way on this. What they have said is we don't want to forfeit innovation, and a lot of young companies are started on the internet. We want to make sure that those companies that are $200,000 or less of sales in our state would not be subject to this, to encourage them to grow and prosper, because the future is really online.
Mr. Boyd?
I'd say it's not only fair but essential. So as sales are moving more and more to the internet, and sales tax is such an important part of our revenue, if we didn't do this, we were going to be in trouble. So it's important that this ruling happened, and I'm excited about the opportunity for us to explore it. I also think it's a sense of fairness. And I know small businesses all across the state of Tennessee, especially in our small towns that are dying, being able to give up, and they can't compete fairly. So we need to be able to let our small businesses in our downtowns all across our state compete. So I think is also a sense of fairness. I think I would look at both, potentially, this is going to be up to the legislature, but having a discussion about what things we could invest in and what ways in which we could reduce taxes. So as Mr. Lee pointed out, we have the highest business taxes in the Southeast. When I was the Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, we had a goal of being #1 in the Southeast for high-quality jobs. When I left, we were #4. Our biggest headwind was our F&E taxes. So Tennessee has 6.5% F&E taxes, which really hits our small business. That's the highest of the 12 states that we have to compete with. So I would want to look to try to also help our small businesses by reducing that tax. I'd also like to look at and have a conversation with the legislature about encouraging better health by maybe lowering some of our taxes on healthier foods at our grocery stores as well. If we have the opportunity to invest, the 2 big areas I'd like to invest, one would be in education. There's so much that we need to do there. And the second thing, I'd like to look at for a one-time non-recurring fee or amount to tackle the opioid crisis. I think if we could put one non-recurring fund initially, I think we could go a long ways to ending this crisis immediately.
This is a question about immigration, which obviously is a national debate, in part, something that the governor wouldn't have a direct influence on. But there has been a debate in Tennessee, started by Senator Todd Gardenhire of Chattanooga, who attempted a couple of times to get passed in-state tuition for immigrants who were brought here by their parents who were born and raised in Tennessee, or not born and raised, but raised in Tennessee, went to Tennessee schools, succeeded in Tennessee, and Senator Gardenhire's position was that these students should be allowed and encouraged to stay in Tennessee, go to college, complete their educations, and become contributing citizens of the state. Are you for or against that position, and why? Mr. Lee, you go first.
I think it's unfortunate that Congress has failed all Americans, and those of us in Tennessee as well, for decades by not resolving the illegal immigration problem, which we all agree is a problem and has been for some time. We finally do have a president who has brought it to the forefront and is trying everything he can to force Congress to make decisions to stop the flow of illegal immigrants across the border. And so there is a federal component to it, but there's a state component too. We can make that situation better or worse for Tennessee. And I'm a business guy, so I know that if you want to incentivize behavior, you do things to cause people to move a certain direction, and you do that on purpose by their choice. And when we create incentives for illegal immigrants to come to our state, then we become a place that they would prefer to come to other places. When we have policies, for example, like giving them driver's license, which we have, we don't today, but or in-state tuition for illegal immigrants or sanctuary to them. When we create policies that make our state an attractive place for them, they come. And so I would oppose those policies as governor to make certain that we help in the alleviation of this national problem.
Okay. Representative Fitzhugh, in-state tuition, yes or no?
Yes, a strong yes. I have been the only person that has had an opportunity to vote on that, and I've voted on it in committee twice and on the floor. Madam Speaker did too. Had the opportunity, but and I voted for it both times. Up until the time just recently where children were removed physically, taken from their parents in this country and sent somewhere, it's the most shameful thing I think we have done in this state, in this country, to these folks that are called illegal aliens. And the reason I say that is because these are called illegal aliens. These are children that know nothing else except this country. They've been to school here from the start. Some of them came in when they're 1 or 2 years old, and they get to be seniors, and they find out, even though some of them are valedictorians and very good students, the kind we want in this country, can't get in-state tuition. It effectively, at least for a time being, sometimes permanently, prevents them from going to college. It's shameful, and I think it's the right thing to do, and Senator Gardenhire and I are on different sides on many things, but I was certainly supportive of him when he took that strong stand, and I hope that it will happen in this next term of the legislature.
Speaker Harwell?
Well, it is indeed a tragedy that Congress cannot take action on an immigration. We need to have a policy as the United States of letting people into this country and going through legal channels and making it much more easy to become a United States citizen. However, I will say the DACA program is, I believe, unconstitutional. It was done through an executive order, and it needs to be done through the legislature. And because of that, I do not favor them getting in-state tuition. I have paid 3 out-of-state tuitions for my 3 children. I understand how it is costly. This is not keeping young people from attending college. They can go to college. They just have to pay the out-of-state tuition, which my children are paying themselves.
Mr. Boyd?
So, thank you. So first off, I agree with the comment that Congress has created a mess. It's been since 1985, since Ronald Reagan, that we've had any meaningful immigration legislation. We absolutely need to have meaningful immigration legislation, and if Congress would do their job, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation. but I too believe that in-state benefits are for legal citizens of the state of Tennessee. At the same time, as we're looking at our resources and what funds we need to, how we need to invest them, the state of Tennessee, we have something called the TSSA scholarship. It's a scholarship that we provide for the neediest amongst our Tennesseans, and we've continually underfunded it. This year, I think the last time I looked, we were only funding about 60% of those scholarships. If we have extra money, I would far rather provide the additional scholarships and additional support for the neediest among us that are already legally here.
Mr. Dean.
Yeah, I'll be a very strong yes for in-state tuition. These young people came here not of their own choice. They came because their parents brought them. They've gone to our schools, they've gone to our churches, they go to our markets. They are part of our state. They are Tennesseans. And they are people who are going to live in this state. And it's in our interest, just as we decided that all other young Tennesseans ought to be able to go to college and be a chance to advance themselves. That is something that we definitely want to see happen. I have been an advocate, for treating people respectfully and decently for a long time. I remember when I first got elected in 2009 and we had to fight against the charter amendment, English only. It was the right thing to do, and our city voted it down, and we kept moving forward. I've worked to create programs for new Americans, leadership programs for them, and worked on school issues for them. This is a friendly and great state, and these young people are part of our state.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. And if I could remind the audience, please refrain from your applause so we can have as many questions as possible. Tennessee is one of 18 states that didn't expand their Medicaid program. We'll start with Mr. Representative Fitzhugh on this question. The state legislature obviously rejected Governor Haslam's proposal to expand Medicaid coverage to 280,000 low-income working Tennesseans. Do you support or oppose Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, and how would you try to make that work as governor?
Well, I see some of my colleagues in the legislature out here now, and they'll know what my answer is. You don't talk to me for over 5 minutes without me mentioning the expansion of Medicaid. I think it's the biggest mistake that the legislature has done in the past 24 years, not doing it. There is no reason, there is no moral reason, there's no monetary reason, there's no medical reason why we don't expand Medicaid. And I'll give you 2 quick examples which show why. 16 is the number. In states that have expanded Medicaid, 16% reduction in the opioid problem on an average. 16 is another number. In states, there are 34 states that have expanded, and Tennessee is not one of them. Louisiana was one of the last to do that. They have added 16,000 new jobs, directly and indirectly, as a result of that. We have hospitals closing there are 3 that have closed in this very area right here. In Tennessee, we have more hospitals closing per capita than any other state in the country. It will help that. It will allow people who are working to have health care. Not people that are on the streets or anything like that. These are people that are working but just can't afford it, or their employer doesn't provide it. So it's one of my very first priority if I'm honored to be elected your governor.
Just as a quick follow-up,
Yep.
Studies have shown, though, that states that expanded Medicaid, and Tennessee's own experience with TennCare was that costs got rose more than in other states. So how do you control the cost to the extent that you expand Medicaid?
Well, I don't think studies have shown that part, but when you ask about us reducing the Medicaid a few years ago, the difference is a huge one. We had it all on our backs, the state's backs. There was no federal assistance to our TennCare program, our Medicaid program at the time, and it was eating our lunch. There's no question about it. Now, it's a federal program, and as a matter of fact, it won't cost Tennessee. There'll be costs, but nothing near the cost of, because we have 90% that the federal government's going to pay for that y'all already pay taxes for, and we're not getting it. And in this state, the hospitals have agreed to increase their bed tax to pay the other 10%. So it's a no-brainer, and I'll be happy to discuss that with
Speaker Arwell, should we expand Medicaid?
Well, we have had expanded Medicaid in the state of Tennessee. We had it up until 2005 when Phil Bredesen became governor, and he cut the rolls. He cut them quite right at 100,000 people because we simply could not afford it. It was bankrupting our state. We were taking money from we drained our rainy day, we took money out of transportation in order to pay for it. It's extremely costly. I know there's this illusion of there's free money coming down from the federal government. Our federal government is $26 trillion in debt. There is no free money. And this state will be bankrupt if we don't do something different in the delivery of health care. So my solution, and I went to Governor Haslam and said, it's now time, we have a new president, go back up and make another application. I would do that as governor, go back up and make another application. And I believe we ask for an entire waiver or entire 10-care program so that we can curtail the cost of our existing program and thus expand it to those people that have behavioral health issues. Because we could do some things. We could have health savings accounts that really have curtailed the cost for a lot of folks. I mean, I'll use this as my own personal example. My husband owns a small business. He has a health savings account for his employees. He was walking by one of his employees' office and he overheard a young man saying on the phone, "How much do you charge to deliver a baby?" He came home and said to me, "Beth, we've had 3 children. We never asked that question because we never had to." But when they have a health savings account and it's their money, they want to control the cost. And so we have to let the free market enter into healthcare if we're going to really curtail the cost. There's many other things we can do. The federal government has just okayed health insurance. Excuse me.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd?
No, thank you. So first off, I think it's really it's a false choice to be talking about expanding the Affordable Care Act now. I mean, that was a ship that passed. We don't have that opportunity today. If you go to the federal government today, that's not on offer. But what is on offer is a block grant. And as governor, the first thing I'll do on day one is go up and ask for a block grant or per cap funding, so where we could get hopefully the same amount of money that we would have otherwise, but with a waiver, as the speaker mentioned, so that Tennesseans can design a policy for Tennesseans, and we could focus on making sure that we provide health care to those that need it the most, and in our rural communities, which is also an area that I'm particularly focused on. But I think there's 2 other big topics that we don't talk about enough. We spend a lot of time talking about how do we get more money for when we're sick, but we also need to be talking about how do we just be healthier in the first place, because it's not about sick care that we want. We just want to be healthier. The state of Tennessee, we're number 6 in the country in smoking, number 8 in the country in obesity. We're number 1 in the country in teenage obesity, but we're number 42nd in income. Those things don't add up. We can't afford the health that we have. 80% of our health care costs, $12 billion worth, is derivatives of obesity and smoking. If we could reduce those 2 things by 10% only, that would save us about $1.2 billion a year. So we need to put a bigger emphasis on just being healthier. And then the second thing is about being better consumers of health care. And I agree with the speaker on health savings account. No one ever asks the price of a product or service. Go to the doctor. How many markets do you know in which no seller ever asks the price or it tells you the price and no consumer ever asks the price? We need to create more consumerism.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. And as a follow-up then, in block grant funding, are there changes you would make in essential services to reduce cost? Would you change the coverage that's available, eliminate some coverage
I think
required under the Affordable Care Act?
I think with our team, with the experts within Tennessee, we could look at our particular needs and come up with a plan that would broaden coverage and make sure we're covering those most in need in our rural communities.
Mr. Dean, should we expand Medicaid?
Yes, we definitely should, and it was a big mistake not to do it. And what it's done to our state is we have lost about $4 billion, and we've seen 10 hospitals close, and that's at least partially attributable to the lack of Medicaid expansion. And when a hospital closes in a rural community, which are the struggling parts of the state, you lose one of your biggest employers. You make it more difficult to attract people to your community, harder to retain them, and harder to attract business. Plus, it means that the medical care is 30 or 45 minutes away. We need to do the Medicaid expansion. And, you know, when you look back on that decision, this is why I believe what this state needs is someone who's going to be pragmatic, common sense, and that decision was highly political. It was about politics, and, you know, other 32, now 33 states have done it. Virginia just did it, so we can still do it. And I know, according to the press, Governor Haslam went to the state leadership, legislative leadership, and said at the beginning of this term, can we revisit this, because we need to do this. And the answer was no. We need to expand Medicaid. Governor Pence in Indiana, who is no liberal, they did Medicaid expansion. It is the rational thing to do. We are not getting our fair share of dollars.
Mr. Lee, should we expand Medicaid?
I would not expand Medicaid, and the reason I would not is because I really believe it's financially irresponsible to do that. We have expanded before and couldn't afford it and had to make that change. We already have 40% of our state budget is federal funding. I really don't believe that we want to even expand our dependency on the federal government in the state. What I really think is, and the rising cost of health care is unsustainable, and expanding coverage without addressing the cost of health care is financially irresponsible for a leader of this state, I believe. The insurance rates in my company went up 29% 2 years ago, 19% the year after that. That's an unsustainable rise. Without a lot of actuarial change, that's an unsustainable rise in healthcare costs. We have a fundamental broken system that has patients, providers, and payers. At no point in any of those 3 points is there an incentive to lower costs. Someone on TennCare that has a sick child has a choice to walk into an ER or walk into a primary care physician, no incentive to choose the lower cost option over the other. Until we create a healthcare system that begins to address the rising cost of healthcare, we cannot and should not expand that system publicly.
School safety is another national issue that also has echoes in Tennessee, as well as paying teachers. A couple of you have already mentioned tonight about teacher raises. How would you expand, where would you find the money to expand school safety, such as SROs and school equipment, and also to raise teacher salaries to make them competitive with the states on either side of us? Speaker Harwell, you'll start with this one.
Okay, thank you so much. We have gone a step forward this past year. We set aside $30 million that local school systems can apply for safety resource officers in their schools. Many of them already have them. We want to make sure that every school has a safety resource officer there. We went further to say to the Homeland Security Department, you need to go to every school in this state and work with the local law enforcement to make sure that these schools give an assessment of where they're able to be broken into, and give us a plan to make every school in the state of Tennessee safe. So those 2 first steps are very critical. As we go forward, I think it behoves the next governor to look at our basic education funding formula and make sure that we are following best practices when it comes to hiring nurses, guidance counselors, and school resource agencies for our state.
The second half of that question was about teacher raises.
Well, it's often said if you want to know what someone values, you look at their budget. We value education in the state of Tennessee. The last 2 budgets, without raising taxes, we have put more money in education than we have ever have in the past. We have raised teacher salaries twice now, and with the help of my chairman of finance, we wrote a letter to every school system in the state of Tennessee saying, we're giving you additional money. We want it spent on raising teacher salaries. So we have come a long way. Are we exactly where we need to be? No. And should we have additional money, I would allocate that to education, but I don't want to sugarcoat things. I'm not going to go into deficit spending in order to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd?
So I think the question was also about school safety as well. So first, on the funding side, I too would want to open up the BEP formula, the basic education plan that we have to fund our schools. I've been to all 95 counties and talked with leaders in every county across the state, and I haven't found a single county that said this formula is working for us. We want to work to make sure that we're rewarding our superstar teachers like superstars. We want to make sure that every school has a school resource officer. We want to make sure that every school has the opportunity to have a nurse. And as Speaker Harwell just mentioned, I also think it's important to have a mental health counselor there as well. As far as the school safety is concerned, having a school resource officer at every school that's not only trained but also engaged. I met with a lot of school resource officers, and the best ones aren't just guarding the door, but they're interacting with the children so they know where there could be a problem in advance and engage with them. The second thing is we've just got to make the schools safer. You look at our airports and other places, they're far, far safer than our schools, where our most precious asset is. But the final thing, and this is the root cause, we've got to start putting a better focus as a society on mental health. If you look at school resource or school safety, if you think about our homeless issue, overcrowding in jails, and part of our drug issue as well, it starts with a lack of emphasis on providing recovery and mental health facilities for people across our state. So as governor, that's going to be a primary focus of mine.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I think I talked before about priorities in a recession, and what I did in Nashville during a recession is you honor your priorities. If schools, and they would be for me, if public education is the most important thing, that's what you protect, that's what you look for as ways of expanding, and I would do that. When Sandy Hook happened, and I was mayor, and we immediately worked with the school board to redirect capital funds to make our schools safer. I think clearly having safe schools is got to be at the very top of everyone's agenda. And so there are physical things you can do. You can bring in SROs to provide more security, and we should do that. And I also think there has to be a conversation around guns.
Please
And
refrain from
I would
applause.
acknowledge that this is a difficult conversation in Tennessee, and you have to recognize that everything will go through the legislature. And you have to respect people's rights. But there are some things that I think we can try to reach consensus on, some things that I think we can move forward on. I think most Tennesseans would agree that we ought to do better in our background checks, that we should not have dangerous people. And I don't mean, mentally ill people. I'm not stigmatizing mentally ill people, but you don't want somebody who's dangerous to have a weapon. You don't want somebody with a lengthy criminal record or somebody who's a domestic abuser have that gun. And you need to look, we should eliminate bump stocks, and there should be a conversation at the very minimum of raising the age for an assault rifle to 21. As Governor Haslam said, if you can't buy a beer, you shouldn't be able to get an assault rifle, and have a larger conversation on that issue.
Mr. Lee?
I think it's absolutely critical that we protect our students. I can't imagine my child going off to school and not coming home. And I have a great deal of sympathy for those who have had to deal with that tragedy. And we need to do whatever it is, whatever we can do to protect our students. We protect our banks with firearms, we protect our courthouses, our governor with firearms, and yet we leave our kids in gun-free zones, and we should change that. There should be...
Please refrain.
And we should do that. There should be no option off the table for that. So whether it's resource officers or retired military or a teacher that is vetted and trained and willing, we should do whatever it takes to protect our kids. And whenever there's a tragedy like this, there is a lot of political pressure to take away the rights of law-abiding citizens because of the actions of a criminal. And I think that's the wrong approach. Those rights are fundamental and protected, and I would advocate for those Second Amendment rights at all times going forward. Regarding teachers and teacher pay, clearly we need to create an environment where teachers can thrive, a testing environment where they can thrive, not that prohibits their ability to be creative and innovative. We've got to support teachers in every way that we can so they can do the work of educating our children. It's critical going forward.
Just as a follow-up, the question was about how would you find the money to do that, to both increase school safety and as well as raising teacher pay?
Yeah, well, one of any number of those three or four options on the table, we would invest in. We will find the resources. You know, when you manage a budget as a business person, you clearly delineate between what you need and what you want. And there are certainly things in state government that we pay for that we want. But protecting our citizens, paying our teachers, creating an educational environment for where teachers can thrive, those are things that we need. And we manage a budget, we determine what it is that we need, and we find the dollars, just as you would in business, to invest in those things that we need, and both of those are things that we need.
Okay. Representative Fitzhugh.
Well, the answer's got a little beyond the question, so I'm going to try to bring it in. It's still going to be tough in a minute and a half, but I have marched with students on 2 occasions and have been to seminars that those students put on. They were amazing. They did it themselves. What they were doing, folks, is just pleading with us to do something about their schools. Can you imagine a child who's sick, who has a toothache, who has problems at home, who has all kinds of things trying to learn? How about if they don't feel safe in the place they're going to learn? So we have to put more resources for school resource officers, I think, is the best thing we can do. And as an aside, I'm certainly not for arming teachers. The second part is, how do we pay teachers more? And here's the solutions that I'm thinking about. Remember, we're the lowest tax state, but people don't want to have their taxes raised, so we have to do other things. I mentioned to you about the internet law bill. I think that will do a lot. The second thing is the Supreme Court has said now that internet gambling is legal. If it's going to be legal, like it or not, I think Tennessee ought to regulate it and ought to tax it and use that for those particular purposes. The third thing is we have to educate our folks so we can generate more sales tax and make our economy grow without raising taxes. If people have better jobs, then they will do that. And the fourth thing is a bill that I passed and that I was prime sponsor of passing in the Senate that set up an endowment for pre-K through 12 education funds, where companies and citizens and we as a portion of our rainy day fund can use that in a trust situation for money that's thrown off to use it for pre-K through 12. So that's some suggestions that I would have. Sorry, I went a little over.
Here in Hamilton County are 12 struggling schools, 5 of which are on the state's priority list, are all in high poverty areas. In this community, there's been a lot of discussion about equity in our schools. Do you support adjusting or reallocating resources to address inequity, or how would your administration address equity in public education and trying to do more in high poverty areas? Start with Mr. Boyd.
I strongly believe that there's not inequality in income, it's inequality in education. If we don't address that, we can never address inequality in income. Something that I experimented or started in Knoxville about 8 years ago is a model that I would like to look at in inner cities in Chattanooga and Memphis and maybe in some of our rural communities as well. And it's called a community school. And here's the background. I went to an elementary school in inner city Knoxville with a professor from the University of Tennessee who had this concept. I remember meeting with the teachers. They had great teachers and a really, really great principal. But the teacher said that these kids come to school every day hungry, with bad eyesight because they've never seen an eye doctor. They're in dental pain because they've never seen a dentist. And this was a 330 student school. They said every single day, some kid comes into the school needing to be taken away in an ambulance, and because they've been beaten or abused the night before, every single day. And unfortunately, so many of our kids are coming to school in such a dangerous and unsupportive environment. It's hard for them to be successful. We can have the best teacher in the world, we can have the best principal in the world, but they're coming to school in that kind of environment, so they're going to struggle. So the community school concept is this. We add an extra 3.5 hours worth of program at the end of each day, an extra hour of reading, an extra hour of math, an extra hour of phys ed. There's a hot dinner where the mom can come, and I'll say mom on purpose because in this school, about 90% of the kids are single moms. They come in and they can have a hot dinner with their kids. And all the community, the churches, the university, others that want to help this at-risk community can provide GED classes, financial literacy classes, and so many other wraparound services. I think it needs a community approach. It's not just within the school time. We've got to have the whole community helping this at-risk community.
Boyd. Mr. Dean, what do we do to improve equity in public education?
Well, I think we definitely should open up the BEP and look at inequities that are occurring around the state. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, it's pretty clear to me that there are a lot of rural communities and small towns that have virtually no ability to raise sales taxes because they have no stores or no car dealerships, that they can do very little to offer enhancements to education. There are certainly real challenges in urban areas with poverty, English as a second language, a whole series of issues. So we need to re-examine that and do everything we can to remove the inequities. You know, my passion for education really comes from the fact that I spent 15 or 16 years as a public defender. And, you know, I worked with people who were impoverished. I fought to protect their rights, and I learned a lot. And what I learned was that my clients, 95 to 96%, were high school dropouts. And I represented a lot of juveniles, and they were leaving school at 12, 13, 14, and you knew that wasn't going to end well. So I've always believed that we got to do more, particularly with people who are at risk, young people at risk. Every kid can learn. Every kid can learn, and I have passion about it because kids only get one shot at first grade and second grade and third grade. That's going to determine so much of their lives, and we should really direct our energies and resources to dealing with these inequalities.
Mr. Lee?
I chaired the YMCA of Middle Tennessee for 2 years, one of the largest nonprofits in the country, actually, certainly in the state. And we have an at-risk inner-city youth program called YCAP. And I met a young man in the inner city one day at a YCAP lunch, and my conversation with him was so meaningful, I went home and told my wife that I wanted to invest in this child. So I started driving into his extremely troubled neighborhood once a week, every week, and spent one evening a week with Adam for 5 years. Adam just graduated from high school about 3 weeks ago. But when I met Adam, he was failing every class in his grade, and he had failed every grade. I had Adam moved from a public school to a public charter school, where his educational trajectory was transformed. And I was inspired by what happened to Adam. What I saw was the power of a good public education in the life of a child. But I was most concerned about the thousands of children that were left behind in poor performing schools. What happened with Adam is he had a choice. And when parents have choices, then the educational system is not only, their educational outcomes not only occurs for that particular child, but for the entire system. And my children were homeschooled, public school, private school. My inner city Adam was in a public charter. it's not the type of school, but the quality of education. And I'm not as much afraid of what's going to happen if we offer choice as it is that I'm afraid of doing the same thing we've been doing for 20 years and getting the same
Thank you, Mr.
results.
Lee. Representative Fitzhugh, do we need to reallocate money in times to help poverty schools?
Yes, I certainly think we do, and the BEP is one place we probably need to look. But remember, we have not fully funded what is called BEP 2.0 to this day yet, and mainly that was to raise teacher salaries. So I think that could do more if we did that. But the fact of the matter is that when you've got the small schools suing for the state for BEP and the large schools, there's probably something that needs to be looked at. So I don't have a problem there. But I think the key that we have to start concentrating on is early childhood education. I'm convinced it's the best thing we can do, not just pre-K, but even before that. I say if a child can learn to read at grade level by grade 3, learn to read at grade level by grade 3, after that they can read to learn about everything else, about math, about science, about music, about history, about themselves, open their mind, and those teachers are the ones that light that switch, that turn on that switch that lights that. And if we don't pay them enough, and I think I've discussed how we can, we're never going to get ahead of the game. Now, I like the community schools. I like the our schools that Memphis uses, for instance, and I think we ought to take some of those things, because the ASD, for instance, on poorly performing schools does not seem to be working to me.
Speaker Howell, how do we address inequity in our public education?
And I appreciate the question. I have to be a little cautious here because I'm a part of the lawsuit. Serving as Speaker, the Lieutenant Governor, the Speaker, and the Governor are being sued right now regarding the basic education program, so I have to be a little cautious on what I say. You know, you're never going to come up with a funding formula that pleases everyone, but as I said to you, we certainly want to increase what we're spending on best practices for school nurses, for guidance counselors, and for our safety resource officers. I will tell you, though, it really goes beyond that, and primary is what I believe in federalism, and I will just use this as an example. You look at the Federal Department of Education. They have over a $100 billion budget. Now, you tell me last week, how many children did those U.S. bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. teach how to read? The answer would be none. Tell me how many children did they help do a math problem? The answer, of course, would be none. And then I have school teachers in my district that have to have fundraisers in order to buy school supplies. What is wrong with that picture? If we just closed down the U.S. Department of Education and returned that money to the state and local governments, we would be able to fully fund education and increase the teachers' salaries forever in this state. And so the answer really is to get these domestic issues back down to the state levels where we can efficiently and effectively run them. I will tell you that there are some counties that pay more into the state funding formula than they actually receive back out because they're growing communities. So it is an issue that we're going to have to revisit. The last time we revisited our basic education funding formula was under Governor Bredesen. I think the next governor is going to have to.
Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to start asking individual questions now to the candidates, and the first one is going to be for Representative Fitzhugh. In competing with other states for new and expanding businesses, how and when should special incentives be offered? Should there be greater transparency about those incentives? And how do you respond to the claim that selectively offering incentives amounts to the government picking winners and losers, or offering a type of corporate welfare to promote growth?
Yes, yes, no, and yes. Okay, let me see if I can work that one out a little bit. You know, we're in this game, and we're one of the fine cities this is one of the fine cities in the South, and we're one of the fine states in the South. But we have competition, and we have to do things that the competition does to be in the game. So yes, I'm for incentives, and we have to do that. We have to use the different incentives because some of the tax incentives that other states have, we don't have. But we have so much more to offer than that. And the fact of the matter is, we have to be selective. But and sometimes we have to be selective based on size. You know, for instance, in my community, 100 or 150 jobs would be like everybody would be dancing in the streets. In a community like Nashville, possibly, or even Chattanooga, maybe that doesn't mean that much. So sometimes we have to select based on the ability for those communities to get those jobs. And help me just a little bit.
The other one was about, does this amount to government picking winners and losers?
Well, I did, yeah.
corporate welfare?
And the other one was about transparency. And I have sponsored bills, and we have passed bills that require transparency, number one, and they require clawbacks, number two. If these companies, we promise them something, and they promise us something, and they don't come back on their particular promises. So we've taken that step, and it's important that we do that.
Thank you.
Speaker Harwell, you and others have voiced oftentimes the notion that government closest to people may be better, and yet we've seen the state government from time to time preempt cities and local jurisdictions making rules about guns in parks, historic monuments, immigration policing policies, short-term vacation rentals, and even where municipal power utilities may operate and offer internet services. As governor, what approach would you use of state versus local control of these kind of zoning and local issues?
Right. I think there is a balance to be here, and hopefully I've established that balance as the Speaker of the House. You have to understand that cities exist because the state government allows them to exist. We create city governments. They have to come to us for their charters, and we allow them to exist. So state governments, based on our Constitution, are supreme. However, I do believe that those best decisions are made at the local level. And so I have a record, I think, of working with my city, which is Nashville, Tennessee, whether it's Airbnb. I voted with my city of Nashville to see that as a local zoning issue, whether it's guns in parks. I did vote for guns in state parks, but I did not vote for guns in local parks because I thought that was a local decision that could be best handled at that. So I think I've balanced that the best I could. You have an aggressive state legislature, but hopefully we can balance that going forward.
This one is for Mr. Lee. Republican Senator Brian Kelsey is going to introduce legislation that would open the door for sports betting in the state with some of the money going to K-12 education. Do you support legalized sports betting in light of the recent court decision? Why or why not?
Yeah, I don't support sports betting, and in part because of what we've seen even in the lottery in the state, which generally has the most negative impact on the lowest income citizens of our state. I think that it creates an environment that is not consistent really with the values of the state. I don't believe that we need to expand gambling in this state. I think when we go to states that have extensive gambling as a part of their revenue generation, we clearly have a greater propensity for organized crime, and it's something that I don't believe that risk justifies the reward, and so I would be against it.
Question for Mr. Dean. Unemployment in Chattanooga area and across Tennessee is now at an 18-year low. Employers tell us their biggest challenge now is getting an adequate supply of workers to meet the needs, particularly well-trained workers. What changes, if any, do you think the state needs to make in education, both at elementary and secondary level and higher education, to better prepare workers for the jobs of the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think really one of the things that's going to confront Tennessee and one of its biggest challenges is workforce development. I think this state, in terms of its business-friendly nature, its relatively low taxes, the quality of life here, and the new federal tax laws, is going to be amazingly attractive to a lot of people. And we've got to have the people here to do those jobs, the qualified people, and that involves having more college-educated people. And so I applaud the Tennessee Promise. I applaud the work that Governor Haslam has done in that area, and we need to do more. We also need to make sure that we understand that not every young person is going to go to college, and that we need to have really good vocational ed programs that allows those who choose not to get something better than a minimum paying job where they can earn a living. Our electricians now are in their 50s on average in Tennessee. Our plumbers are getting there too, and those are jobs where you always need them. And we need to make sure that we have the up-to-date, first-class vocational programs all over the state to satisfy that need too. But workforce development I see as one of the most important things for us to work on over the next few years. We're ideally placed, and we need to be able to take advantage of that.
And Mr. Boyd, Tennessee's economy strongly depends on direct foreign investment. We had more than 300 foreign companies located in Tennessee in the last decade, and the state exported more than $33 billion worth of goods and services to foreign countries. Do you think that the tariffs and import restrictions that President Trump is implementing on steel, aluminum, and other products is going to hurt Tennessee in the world market?
Yes. So as Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, one of my jobs was to help recruit jobs to our state. And in my 2-year stint, we did recruit over 50,000 jobs to the state. And a significant portion were in foreign countries. In fact, we expanded our foreign development offices from 1 to 10. So we're aggressively reaching out to other companies and trying to bring them here. I think our low-tax state, our geography makes us one of the most attractive places to invest. The tariffs are complicated. It depends on that particular industry. There will be some companies that will actually want to move here because of the tariffs, some that will be repelled. Just with regards to the tariffs in general, the president's going to make decisions that he thinks is best for the United States. As the governor, I have to represent the people of Tennessee. I've traveled across the state and talked about these tariffs with a lot of different businesses. Tennessee is a producer or fabricator of steel. We don't make steel. So I think about my company, our company I met with in Paris, Tennessee, about a month ago. They have 300 employees. They stamp metal parts and sell them to people all across the country. As a result of the tariffs, those 300 jobs are at risk. There's companies like that all across our state that are at risk of losing their company because of the steel tariffs. At the same time, I was visiting with a farmer in Lauderdale County, and he sells 3 out of 4 of his bushels of soybean to China. If they put a blockade on our soybeans, he will lose his business. So my job is to advocate for Tennessee. I will go to the president and explain why this is bad for Tennessee. At the end of the day, he'll make a decision on what he thinks is best for America. But my job is to make sure that I fight for Tennesseans.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more question for everyone here, and I'll start with Mr. Lee. You traveled across Tennessee and aware of the problems in terms of rural counties that tend to have the highest unemployment rates, the greatest number of distressed counties. What specifically can the state do to help rural areas grow and to match the growth of areas like Nashville and here in Chattanooga?
Yeah, our state is doing quite well in most of its big cities, but our rural communities, our small towns are struggling. A year ago, actually, my wife and I, to bring awareness to this problem, we took a tractor from my farm. As you know, I'm a third-generation cattle farmer. I'm deeply involved in the ag industry and a product of rural Tennessee. And we took a tractor to Mountain City and drove it 758 miles to Memphis to talk about the struggles in rural Tennessee. I developed something called a roadmap for rural Tennessee last year, specifically around this. There are a lot of points about that can change the trajectory of rural Tennessee, but one of the most important to me is to changing our education system, and particularly to focus on those 4 out of 10 kids in our state that do not go to college, that are gifted and talented in ways other. I employ skilled tradespeople, 1,200 of them. I have a master plumber's license myself. People talk a lot about this issue of workforce development and vocational trade. I started a trade school 10 years ago in my company, and we have put 1,000 people through that program, educating them in welding, plumbing, pipe fitting, electrical. This is no new problem to people in my industry, but it would, if we would focus by engaging the private sector with the education system across this state to develop a workforce, we can begin the transformation of rural Tennessee and take those 15 poverty counties and bring them not only to a place where they survive, but where they actually flourish.
Representative Fitzhugh, what do we do to help rural counties in Tennessee?
Well, I think we do the same thing that we help other counties with. We just have to remember that the tax base on these rural counties is not what it is everywhere else in larger cities. You know, I'm not so much concerned with cities and those in the skyscrapers, but I'm concerned with those in the shadows of the skyscrapers, and many of those are in cities and in rural areas. So we have to ask those communities what they need, what they want, and try to help them do that. I think one of the major things that we can do, we know exactly who doesn't have broadband, and mainly it's in the rural areas. We need to make every community in this state be like this gig city we got here and have broadband that has the ability to keep those folks in the rural areas where they'd like to be. They just can't make a living. So that's probably one of the main things I would do. And then I'm back on this again, but expand Medicaid so their hospitals won't close, so they have the ability to have health care, so that will cause that effect like they had in Louisiana for more jobs. I think those are the 2 quickest things that we can do and help that opioid problem, which is coming to the rural areas just as much as it is the rest part of the state. So the needs are not that much different, but we just have to sort of tailor them to the unique ability of a rural community.
Speaker Arwa.
Well, this is a beautiful, diverse state, and when you drive to the rural areas and visit with them, they love where they live. They wouldn't live in an inner city area. They live where they want to live. But we have done some remarkable things. We've reformed unemployment and workers' compensation laws in the state of Tennessee, creating a much more stable legal environment. We are gaining more manufacturing into the state of Tennessee. We reformed our our F&E taxes to make it more palatable for manufacturers to locate here in the state of Tennessee, and most of them are moving to our rural areas. Many people don't realize, but if Kiplinger report just made Tennessee the 4th best state to retire in. And a lot of those folks that come here to retire are moving to our rural areas. So we have some incentive programs to help our rural areas. It's without a doubt we need to create a more educated workforce. Our TCATs are doing a remarkable job. We have 27 of them throughout our state, and many of them are located in the rural areas. It would be my goal as governor when we go out to recruit industry to come to the state of Tennessee that we would give a higher incentive for those that would come in part of those distressed counties. And I would take our TCAT directors of our schools in that area with me to recruit and say, what do you need in the workforce in order to locate here in rural West Tennessee or rural East Tennessee? And we can work together to help our rural communities grow and prosper. And it's absolutely, without a doubt, broadband is critical. That is critical for small businesses. It's critical for young people doing their homework. And we've set aside a certain amount of money already. 9 grants have already been awarded. 4 of those are in our distressed counties. So I think we're headed in the right direction.
Thank you, Speaker. Mr. Boyd, what do we do to help rural counties?
So I have 3 big objectives as governor of the state of Tennessee, and this is one of them. When I was Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, I traveled to all 95 counties, and you quickly realize that we're a state of haves and have-nots. Actually, 21 of our counties when we started were distressed, meaning they're in the bottom 10% in the entire United States in poverty and income and unemployment. So we put together a governor's rural task force, which I led, also appointed an assistant commissioner for rural development. We worked with 120 people from all across the state over a year and a half of looking at different solutions. We came up with a range of solutions. Those solutions helped us to reduce the number of distressed counties from 21 to 15. But the goal is to have 0 by the year 2025. There's 6 big things. First is education. We need to bring technical education to those schools so that every kid has a skill to get a great job. 55% of the population by the year 2025 needs some skill beyond high school. Lake County, only 8% of the population today does. When a company looks at that, they're not going to go there. We've got to invest in sites. We've got to invest in broadband. I helped pass a bill that offers broadband through our electric co-ops. 2.5 million people are now going to be able to have broadband because of letting co-ops now offer broadband. We're going to invest in agriculture. In most of our rural communities, agriculture is a key foundation of their economy. Tourism and entrepreneurship.
Mr. Dean, you were mayor of one of the fastest growing cities in the country. How do you expand that out of the rural areas?
Well, I think, first of all, you look at basics, and the basics are education, which we've talked about, and the importance of dealing with disparities that exist in rural areas. And then I also think we have to look at the healthcare issue. I mean, if we want to have retirees coming into communities to live there after their work days are over, you're going to need to have medical care. And so it's vitally important that we have hospitals that attract people and keep people in their communities. I think we have to focus our economic development energies on those areas of the state that need it. There are parts of the state where people feel forgotten, where people feel that the prosperity that they've seen in Nashville or Chattanooga, Knoxville, and elsewhere is not being shared by the rest of the state. And so we need to direct our attentions there, look at their particular needs and their particular strengths. You know, Chattanooga is sort of the model of taking the outdoor economy and turning it into a great thing for this city, and that can be done in other places too. And then I think rural broadband is absolutely essential. We need to be going about that with a lot more urgency. You know, it's very much akin to rural electrification in the 30s. I mean, you cannot move forward without it. It affects education, it affects entrepreneurship, it affects jobs, and it's going to affect medical care too, because as people are more remote from their hospitals, people are going to rely on the internet, and if you don't have access to broadband, it's a big problem. I would speed it up dramatically, and that would be an area where I think it's an investment in ourselves. And this state should have enough confidence to invest in ourselves in our rural areas.
One final question just on criminal justice. By some measures, 2/3 or more of those in Tennessee jails and prisons today are there because of mental illness or because of drug addiction. And of those who are incarcerated, more than 95% ultimately be released, but nearly half of those commit crimes again. Many of you have voiced support for truth in sentencing measures at the state level to lengthen prison terms, but I wondered what changes ought to be, if any, made in terms of our jail and prison system and how we incarcerate and rehabilitate people. And I'll start with Representative Fitzhugh.
All right, sir, thank you. We desperately need criminal justice reform in this state. We are behind other states where it's a bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats and independents can join together. Now, some will be for that because they think it's the right thing to do. If someone's in prison for a status offense or a nonviolent offense or a drug sale or something like that and in prison forever, it costs a lot of money, but it's not the right thing to do to disallow somebody from making that mistake, spending their time getting training to get back into the workforce and lead a life outside of prison. On the other hand, some think that we ought to do it because it's awfully expensive. I use the old Fram commercial where you say, you know, the guy's holding the oil filter and it says, you can pay me now with an oil filter or you can pay me later with a brand new engine. Well, the engine that they're talking about is prison. So we can save money if we do reform. We're behind the 8 ball on this. We did some a little bit last year, but we've got a long way to go in our state. And I, as your governor, I would take reasonable measures to reform our criminal justice system for the human cost that it prevents us from having and the physical cost that it prevents us from having.
Speaker Harwell.
Well, I would agree with that. We did a first step with our juvenile justice reform. We hadn't looked at juvenile justice in 20 years. We reformed our system this past year. We need to do it for our adult system as well. It's without a doubt, we have to be realistic. Prison beds are a limited resource and they're very expensive. And our most hardened, violent criminals should be taking those prison beds, but if it's a blue-collar prisoner, we ought to be able to give something for them to have to pay back society rather than take up a prison bed. And I will tell you, we took another good first step this last year. We started a program called Fresh Start. If you have been convicted of a crime, you still can get a license to practice in the state of Tennessee. So if you want to be a licensed plumber or barber, you can still get that. Prior to that passage of that law, you would be forbidden from getting a license. That doesn't even make sense. If we're going to let these people out of prison, we need to give them the ability to earn a living. We also started a program, the pilot program, for 4 of our local jails, which said to them, these jails, we'll give you 80% of this money at the beginning, and 3 years later, if you reduce your recidivism rate, we'll give you the other 20%. Encouraging jails to participate in not-for-profit programs that can help train these people to earn a living. It could be everything from Men of Valor to the door next door. We have opportunities to help these people find jobs, and many of them are faith-based. Tennessee was the first state in the nation to recognize faith-based programs.
Mr. Boyd.
Yes, over the last 17 months, I've toured over 50 jails, sat down and visited with over 70 sheriffs, have a law enforcement coalition that have talked to me extensively about this issue. So I'll share 3 things. First off, we have to have specialty courts, recovery courts, and juvenile courts, so that we can direct and divert people to better care than jail. Too many times we're sending people that shouldn't be going to jail. So we have to have the recovery courts and the juvenile courts. The second thing, we have to have a place for them to go. As a state, we have underinvested in mental health and recovery facilities across the state. In fact, the nation in 1963 had 500,000 beds for people with mental health and recovery issues. Today, we're down to 33,000, a 95% reduction. The same is true in the state of Tennessee. So we have to invest in places for them to go. And then finally, if they are incarcerated in our jails, we have to give them paths out so they're not coming back. In Greene County, they have a great example of a work program where the inmates actually could go to a factory and work. They work an 8-hour day, they come back. The good news is they're getting trained, they're getting a job when they come out, and they're earning money so they can pay off all their fees and debts, which is one of the biggest reasons why so many of them come back, because they're unable to pay their fees. In Gibson County, they have a TCAT that's working with them to actually train the inmates in skills so that they can get new jobs. I think if we can invest in those things, we can greatly reduce our recidivism.
Mr. Dean, what do we do with criminal justice to improve it?
Well, I don't know if I should say this. I spent a lot of time in jail as a lawyer. Look, I think there are a lot of things we need to do. I mean, one, specifically dealing with mental illness. There are some of the most tragic situations are folks who have family members, they don't know what to do with them, and they turn to jail. And people aren't getting treatment in jail. They're not going to have their problems solved. And we need to have different pathways for people to get mental health treatment and for their loved ones to have a place for them to seek that treatment. I think when we try to reform the criminal justice system, when we try to make it better, it really is important about doing things bipartisan and bringing people together. I know that in the late 80s, we did our criminal code here, and it involved experts, it involved bipartisan work, and that's what needs to happen. I think we have to look at the issue of bonds. I mean, clearly people who are dangerous offenders, people who are accused of some very serious crimes will not get out on bond. But if someone is accused of something and they're held in jail for days or weeks or months just because they don't have access to cash to pay a bond, that's wrong. And we should look for ways to do bond reform so that people are treated equitably. I think we clearly need to look at better programs in prison for education. As you mentioned, the vast, vast majority of people are going to be released. And it's in our interest to make sure that while they're there, they receive drug and alcohol treatment if that's relevant, mental health treatment if that's relevant, but also get a GED and maybe get some training for a job so you don't keep the wheel spinning and they can become productive members of society. It's a tough issue. I mean, no one has patience with violent crime. I don't at all. But there are things that we could do that can save money and save people.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Mr. Lee?
Yeah, it's something that I am deeply interested in. I've served on the board of a nonprofit called Men of Valor for many years. And as a result of that, I made the decision to mentor a man who was coming out of prison. I spent a lot of time in prison, as Mayor did, but for the right reasons, talking to incarcerated men. And I made a decision to mentor a man as a part of this program who was coming out of prison, who's now been out for 7 years. But I spent one morning a week with him every week at 5:30 in the morning for years. And I saw a man's life transformed by a reentry program that was out of the box thinking from the way we do it in government. So as an outsider, as a guy who is a private sector believer and one that thinks the nonprofit and the private sector is much more efficient and effective than government can ever be in many ways, I saw this reentry program have a 15% recidivism rate in the hundreds of men that went through it. They intersect men in prison, located in the state prison, and then provide transitional housing and job placement. They partner with companies like mine who agree to employ those for certain settings that are appropriate for those folks when they come out and start them on a pathway to success. We know, I have watched this happen. We know it can happen. If we want to really reduce crime in this state, we need to be smart on crime and tough on crime at the same time. We look differently at how we bring people in through mental health, veterans courts, alternative sentencing, and we look much more vigorously at what we do with them when they come out.
Thank you, candidates, for all of your responses. Now we'll give you 1 minute for a closing statement. We'll start with Speaker Harwell.
Well, thank you. I was so glad to be with you all this evening. You know, as I've said before, elections are about choices. And if you choose to vote in the Republican primary, I would say that of all the Republican candidates that are before you this evening, you can choose between promises or you can choose performance. And I believe that I have performed well for our state. I have balanced and signed into law 8 balanced budgets. I have lowered taxes for all Tennesseans. I have ended sanctuary cities in the state of Tennessee. And I have limited state government in your lives. I will tell you that if President Trump is successful and domestic issues are returned to the state level, where I believe they can be more efficiently and effectively run, you will want someone that has experience in state government, knows where the state departments are and what they do, can work with the legislative body, which I have the proven ability to do, because I believe this state is on fire. There is no other state in the nation I'd rather live in Tennessee. I believe we have so much ahead of us. And I believe that I am the right person to serve as your next governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Fitzhugh?
Thanks very much, and thank y'all for being so attentive. I'm watching you, and you really were, and I appreciate it because it's, you know, there's some heavy subjects here, and I appreciate my colleagues as well on this stand. I'm asking for your support and your vote in the Democratic primary for governor of our state. I've lived here all my life, except for the 4 years that I served in the Air Force. I've the first person in my family to go to college. Public education is primary to me. I was educated in public schools, as were my children, as are my grandchildren who are old enough to go to school. I'm proud of that, and I think it's the key to our success and our future. We have a great state. God put us in a great place, and we're going to do just fine, but we need to remember those in the shadows of the skyscrapers. It's all about people, ladies and gentlemen. If we keep our minds in government on people, you can use business practices to run a government, but government doesn't run for a profit. Government runs for people. and we need to remember that. I say, people first, progress for all of us, and Tennessee always. My friend Governor McWhorter said when he got elected governor, he said, give me 4 vanilla wafers and a cup of coffee, and I'll be ready to hit the office running on Monday morning. I say give me 2, and I'll get a good run. Thank you.
Mr. Lee?
Thank you for the privilege. Thanks for the attentiveness. Thank you, Chattanooga Times Free Press, for putting this together. University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, for hosting. By the way, congratulations on your recent $40 million gift. It's exciting for you all as an institution. Tennesseans do have an important choice to make in just a few short weeks, and you'll be choosing your choice for the leader of the executive branch of government in the state, and I've had a life of executive leadership. And I believe the next governor should believe that Tennessee can lead the nation. And I believe that Tennessee can lead the nation, but only if we're willing to challenge the status quo. In business, we know that good is the enemy of great. And challenging that status quo is realizing that there is a big difference between leadership and politics. And I do think the choice is clear. Politicians, insiders, each with their own strengths, but I've found that Tennesseans want a conservative and an outsider that can bring fresh ideas to this state. And I am the only candidate that can do that. I believe that servant leadership is the most powerful form of leadership, and I would be honored to serve you as your next governor. Thank you.
Mr. Dean. Mr. Dean?
Thank you. It's been a privilege to be with you all. I'm running for governor because I'm convinced the people of Tennessee want a pragmatic, common sense, sort of get-it-done person as their governor. They want somebody who's not going to be an extremist or looking at everything through ideological lenses, but somebody who's actually going to try to get some things done. You know, when I ran for mayor in Nashville, I ran in a nonpartisan race. I had to get Democrats, Republicans, and independents to vote for me. And when I did the job, I did it for all the people in Nashville to move the city forward, and I did it in difficult times, at the recession and the flood, and I did it during good times and a boom. And I think this state's best days are still to come. We have people in this state who feel forgotten. We have communities where people are leaving. But if we focus on the basics, which are education, economic opportunity, and health care, this state is going to do great, and our best days are truly ahead of us. Thank you.
Mr. Boyd?
I'd like to compliment the Chattanooga Times Free Press on a great forum. The questions were intelligent, and I think they informed the public. So thank you for really organizing a great forum. So I believe that I have the right experience and the right vision for the state of Tennessee, to serve the state of Tennessee as your next governor. So with regards to experience, I started a business from scratch that grew today to over 700 employees and over 4,600 products. I think that's important because you need a governor that's actually managed something before, that's actually made a payroll before. And by being an entrepreneur, by starting something from scratch, by definition, you have to be innovative and disruptive. And in my experience, government needs some innovation and it needs some disruption, and who better than an entrepreneur? But second, I'm the only one on the stage that has state executive experience. And I've got to serve Governor Haslam twice. First, as a special advisor on higher education, creating the Drive to 55 and the Tennessee Promise so that every kid in the state of Tennessee can go to community college and technical college for free. Got to come back as the Commissioner of Economic and Community Development and proved I could recruit over 50,000 jobs to our state. And then also created the Governor's Rural Task Force to focus on those rural communities that we talked about. So I believe I have the right experience to help us create the vision of making Tennessee the state of opportunity. Opportunity for better education, opportunity for better jobs, and opportunity for everyone. We're going to complete the Drive to 55. We're going to be #1 in the Southeast for high-quality jobs, and we're going to have 0 distressed counties. We can only be successful if we're successful together, and I hope I have the opportunity to serve as your next governor. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking all of our candidates for tonight's forum.